Hello and welcome to another episode of the Get Psyched Show. Today we are joined by the COO of the UCI Cycling Worlds 2023 and overall Scottish events legend, Stuart Turner. We hear about Stuart's amazing experience having been involved in some of the biggest sporting events in Scotland and across the world. We cover a huge range of topics including the UCI's last year, Olympic Games and Commonwealth Games preparation, events in New Zealand and self-care during stressful times. I hope you enjoy the episode and be sure to leave a review. Thank you. Right, hi Stuart, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
I'm very good, thanks, George. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Good to be chatting today and looking forward to what we've got to speak over. Just to start with, could you give a brief overview of, I guess, where you started in your career? So maybe the end of school, going into university, and then some of the roles that you've had in your career and some of the things you've worked on.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back, I'm a Stirling boy, as I know you are as well.
Yeah.
Grew up around Stirling and went to Wallace High School. And when I left there, I went into what was at the time Dunfermline College of PE in Edinburgh. As I was there, it changed to become part of Murray House, and it's now that whole PE section is now part of Edinburgh University. But so I graduated from there with a sport management degree. And I've got a job more or less straight away down in Sunderland, working as a water sports development officer, which was kind of the angle I wanted to go into. I wanted to be doing sports development, but I also wanted to be still hands on the tools, if you like, actually teaching people kayaking, windsurfing, sailing. So I had a couple of years down there, just absolutely loved it. It was brilliant. I was out in the harbour every day, doing various things, and then moved on from there back to Scotland, and was up in Perth and Kinross as an outdoor activities sports development officer for a few years. Moved to Angus as a sports development officer, and then on to Sport Scotland, where I worked in the high performance team, which is probably where my close relationship with events really started. I had 7 years at Sport Scotland and looked after the Commonwealth Games of the whole time I was there, and then moved on from there to Scottish Golf. 3 years there as a performance and development manager for Scottish Golf, and then latterly had 10 years at Event Scotland as the head of sports events, and then later as a head of Event Scotland. So it was a fairly long journey through Scotland. I then did a couple of years in Auckland, came back from Auckland in 2019 and formed my own business. And as part of that, over the last few years, I worked as the chief operating officer of the Cycling Worlds. So, yeah, it's been a long and checkered career in sport, right through local authorities and national agencies and governing bodies. So, kind of done all of those angles really.
Yeah, awesome. And as you've sort of said recently, you've been more involved in an event side and that sort of side of things in sport, but that wasn't where you started out. It was a very sports development career and a range of different sports and jobs in that sector. I'm going to ask you more about your sort of experience with Commonwealth Games and that work in New Zealand as well a bit later. But coming back to your most recent role with a UCI Cycling Worlds, I'm a massive cycling fan. So when I found out about it being in Scotland and the first time of an event like this, it was almost a bit of a dream getting to see the best cyclists in the world right on our streets. So for people that maybe weren't involved in the event or didn't know much about it, could you give a brief explanation of what the Cycling Worlds were last year and the idea behind the whole event?
Yeah, I think it was a first, as you said, George, and basically what had happened was Event Scotland after I'd left, Paul Bush and Robbie Clyde from Event Scotland sat down with the UCI at an annual conference called Sport Accord that we always used to go to every year, still do go to every year. And they were talking about what was the art of the possible, and Scotland was quite keen to host a World Road Cycling Championship. We wanted to have the mountain bike downhill world championships again, having had those in 2007 and had a World Cup annually up at Fort William, which is probably one of Scotland's blue ribboned events. Just such a great event. And then also with having the velodrome in Glasgow, which is a fantastic velodrome, we really wanted to do a track cycling worlds. So we started talking about the idea of those events together, and basically came up with the idea of a multi world championships, co-locating them all in the same country at the same time. And it grew a few arms and legs from there. It grew up to being 13 different world championships all coming together. two of which were amateur world championships. And again, for those that know their events, things like the Grand Fondo and the BMX Challenge, which are the two amateur events, they have huge numbers of competitors from all over the world, thousands of competitors. So what it does is it boosts your overall competitor numbers, but it really boosts the economic impact. And particularly for the Grand Fondo, a lot of the riders will come and they won't just ride the 2 days of the Grand Fondo. They'll stay here for 2-3 weeks riding their bikes around the country, which really spreads that economic benefit and also lets people see what a great place Scotland is for cycling. So that was really the essence of the event, and the whole premise that we set out with is that it would showcase cycling in Scotland in many different forms. So whilst it was Glasgow and Scotland, and half of the event, if you like, was in Glasgow, particularly the venue-based stuff was in Glasgow, it was spread as far as Dumfries, Scottish Borders, Dundee and Perth and Angus, and then up to Fort William for the mountain bike downhill, and Stirling, as you will know, for the time trials, which obviously was close to both of our hearts. So it was a good spread across Scotland of the event, lots of different disciplines, and the bit that probably starts to really get to people's heads is that there were more athletes than 2014 Commonwealth Games. So in terms of the number of people that came to take part in it, it's a bigger event. There were more diverse locations in the Commonwealth Games. And also for the women's road race, which was the last event of the day, it's the biggest single day sporting event for spectators for women ever. So that becomes quite a probably puts it in a bit of context for people. For the women's road race, we had 110,000 people in Glasgow, which, as I say, is the biggest single day sports audience for a women's event ever. For the men's road race, we had 300,000 in Glasgow, which was just phenomenal.
Yeah. Yeah, it was for people that were there that day, and I know a lot of people who not even big cycling fans, but just involved in the atmosphere and saw the build up. And when you see a city taken over with the streets closed and all these nice bikes going about and the big team trucks as well, it's difficult not to get sort of wrapped up in it all and the magic of it. I think as well for cycling, it's a sport that sometimes, well, it's had especially over recent years quite a difficult reputation because of what's going on. So a big part of that is, I guess, showing that cycling is changed, and it's trying to open it to a new audience as well. And I think the idea of an event like this is so good because it aligns all those different disciplines and makes it a clear event.
Yeah.
UCI is the world championships, because it's so many different disciplines. It's often you may stick in just your own discipline. So for me, for example, I like the road. That's where I focus on. But having an event like this where it's all together, you take that interest in the mountain biking, in the track cycling as well. So it's a great idea. For you, how did you get involved in the event? You were chief operating officer, so leading a lot of the stuff going on. Obviously, you've got your experience in Event Scotland, but how did that opportunity come up for you?
I think probably almost accidentally. I did have a conversation with them about whether I would apply for the chief executive officer and decided not to apply for it because I had a fledgling business of my own that I was just kind of getting going with. However, then, as with many people, COVID changed everybody's plans because they were in the process of appointing the chief executive officer, who ended up being the chief exec, which was Trudy Lindblade from Australia. She was in Australia at the time. COVID, everything was locked down. She couldn't get out of the house to go to the visa office to get a visa to be able to ensure that she could take up the job and then hand in a notice and move across. So whilst she was trying to do all of that and was just, I guess, locked down, I was asked if I would take on a sort of acting CEO role for sort of on a 3-day-a-week basis, really to get the company set up and get the initial staff in and talk to Trudy on a weekly basis just to sort of get her input into what was happening. So I took that on as on a consultancy basis, expecting to be there for maybe 6 months and then do a baton handover to Trudy and let her run the event. And I guess I just never got out the door. So at the end of 2020, Trudy asked me to stay on a couple of days a week and particularly look at the contracting with some of the big partners, Glasgow, UK Sport, and British Cycling. And then really from there, my involvement just grew back to being full-time and being chief operating officer. Which I guess the difference between the CEO role and the chief operating officer role is that the chief operating officer kind of looks more internally. And chief executive would look more to the partners and external, the board members and that level. And so I guess my role was really fixing problems and yeah, there was a lot of problems to fix because it was the first time it ever happened. It was a difficult operating environment. The first year of the event, we didn't have an office and everybody was working remotely. And for events, that's not the norm. People are usually bouncing off each other and having, 20-minute meetings and stand-up meetings in the cafe and so on, just to really keep momentum moving. Because the one thing that you can't change is when the event's going to happen. So you've always got to
Hmm.
plan on the basis that you can spend a bit more money if you've got it, or you can change the scope of what you're doing. But what you can't do is change the time you've got to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I guess one of the biggest pressures, or the big pressure with events. When you're coming into planning an event like this that's never really happened before on this scale, what are the sort of steps of processes to get things into place? So is it first, once you've got that sort of green flag from the UCI, but yeah, this is what we want to do, who do you speak to next? What are your next sort of steps over the years to get everything to happen?
Yeah, look, I think it does depend on exactly how the genesis of the event has come about. But with this one, because it was something that the concept was born, and then there was a whole load of work to get all the partners on board to put together the budget and to get the necessary resource from Scottish Government, from Glasgow, from UK Sport, from British Cycling. Um, I guess the partners were already bought. There was a business case had been created around this is what it would look like, this is how it would work. Now, some of that's very top level, but actually, what it gave us is, we had a budget for staff. We had a staffing structure that from day one. That's the point. That's the post we need to go ahead and recruit. So, from my point of view, the first job I had was to finish off forming the company. People had started that, but we finished off forming the company. We appointed the board members, and then we just started appointing the staff in a flow from where it comes, because you've got to get people in so you can get them to do things. And obviously, the sooner you can get people on the ground, the sooner they can start working on their functional areas and directorates to get things happening. Um, and really, I guess that it was also then just determining how everything fits together. You've got all the bits of the jigsaw on the table, but you just need to start fitting them together. And getting agreement on the core deliverables. So things like the road race, it's getting agreement on what the route actually is. So first of all, you've got to agree on an aspirational route. Where do we want to go? And then you've got to get all the authorising authorities to agree that they'll support that route, and what resource that needs, and how many roads at the side need to be closed, how many police outriders you need to do that, etc., etc. So there's quite a complicated planning process, particularly for the ones that are non-venue based. Things like the track cycling on Paratrack, for example, are actually relatively simple in that there's a finite audience that can go and see it because there's a finite number of seats. So you kind of know what you're catering for. You know what the transport, you can very accurately judge what you need to make that run. And it's been done before. We've filled the velodrome. The World Cup usually fills the velodrome. So actually, it's just repeating that over several days, but it's not particularly complicated for Glasgow, who've got experience of doing that. Whereas you take something like a World Roads, and you've got no idea how many people are going to turn up at the end. I mean, you can predict, but you're predicting on the basis of something you've never done before. So you're using other people's information. You know what it happened when it was in Copenhagen or when it was in Norway or whatever, but you don't know what it's going to be when it's in Glasgow. So that's always a kind of an element that you've got to deal with. There's uncertainty, and for the non-venue based events, which we had a lot of, we had road racing almost every day of the championships in one form or another. Those are free, which is great, in terms of taking the event to people, and the people can just turn out and watch it. But also, it does mean that in terms of planning, some of the logistics around transport and feeding those people and providing facilities like toilets, etc., is really difficult because the numbers are unknown. So
Hmm.
that's the sort of thing that you have to deal with. And somewhere like Stirling, I mean, Stirling were brilliant to work with, and they managed to soak up the audience. They worked with a lot of businesses to help out. They worked with the transport planning companies to make sure we got people into the city and we dispersed them around the course. So it worked really, really well. And I think it's credit to a lot of the local authorities with the amount of work that they did in the background. It's the unattractive stuff that isn't necessarily seen as well, but getting the roads into a condition that they can be raced on, making sure the rubbish all gets collected day after day, moving people around and making sure that business as usual can happen. All that stuff's really important for events because what you don't want is a lot of negativity. And road racing naturally causes disturbance because it's shutting roads that would normally be public roads. So you've got to try and minimise that disturbance and give people the maximum amount of information about what's going to be shut and when it's going to be shut. And I think the councils across Scotland are brilliant at doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear all the different parts that you've got to come together, and until you start, I think, naming them is when you start really understanding how many different sections are working, and especially with different councils, each one will have their own objectives and ideas. And for example, like the road races, when you're starting in Edinburgh and you're going through 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 different council areas and getting that permission to shut roads and all the support for that. Yeah, I wouldn't know I wouldn't know where to start with all that, but it's really interesting. I think as well, I remember going on the men's road race, and after it coming home, and I read later on Twitter that night that ScotRail had one of their busiest Sundays ever for passenger numbers, and I think that just shows the numbers of the event. Were you surprised, or did the numbers exceed your expectations for people attending things like the road race?
No, no. I think actually, our projections were pretty accurate. We set out the stall in the business case that it would be 1 million spectators across the whole of the event, across everything. And actually, when you do your number count and your crunch and your estimate, again, obviously some of them are estimates, some of them are ticketed events, so we know exact numbers. We came to just over 1 million, so we were pretty much bang on. I guess the bits we might have expected is that we might have expected a few more people in some places and a few less in others. I think the men's road race in particular was probably exceeded our expectations for the numbers that were around the course. But it was within the tolerance of what we were expecting. We were expecting it to be very, very busy, just maybe not quite at the 300,000 level. But when you start to look at that, like I say, that the things like the BMX and the velodrome and a finite audiences, there are only a certain number of people you can get in there. Because they're fixed venues. Whereas once you go to road races, if people can't get a space in one place, they can move up the course and find a place somewhere else. So the numbers can very quickly get pretty big, and a lot of that we accept as people just literally coming out of their houses to watch it for a bit. But there were, as you say, there were a lot of people travelling by train. There were actually a lot of people cycled into Glasgow. I mean, pretty much every bike rack around was used. And we provided quite a lot of extra bike parking, and it was all used. So that again, that's a really good thing for us, because one of the big things about this event was it wasn't just about holding an event to get the media profile and the economic benefit. It was about trying to demonstrate the power of the bike and link, I guess, performance cycling to just riding a bike for whatever you ride it for, whether it's riding to school, riding to work, just riding for fitness and pleasure, riding as families, riding with friends. And I think that in the past, there's probably a little bit of a disconnect between, if you like, the out and out lycra warriors who are out there, pushing to do the sport cycling, or the extreme downhillers or cross country mountain bikers, and the recreational people. And what we're trying to do is to bring that together and say, look, these guys are just at that end of the same sport. They're the guys who take it really, really seriously and want to do it. But it's the same as, I suppose, connecting grassroots football to professional football. It's the same sport, and actually what we all want is more people on bikes, because bikes are a great form of transport. They're really friendly for the environment. They're good for general background fitness. I cycle to school every single day. Come rain, hail, or snow, I still cycle to school every day, and it gives you a base of fitness for the rest of your life. And whenever I can, I would cycle somewhere. Now that's what we were trying to encourage people to do. And in the background, we ran a campaign called 23 million miles, because it was 2023. And we actually had people who were replacing other journeys that we'd normally have done with bike journeys and logging it. And we got to about 27 million miles across the world. So, that's what we were trying to do. We were really trying to inspire people to ride the bike more. And indicators are that we've been pretty successful in that. There's always more you can do.
Yeah, awesome. I think it was something I was going to come on to about sort of a legacy from the event, and that was a huge part of it, of getting more people on their bikes, and as a motto was the power of a bike. And I think it's such a key part of using an event like this, as you say, not just for the economic benefit, but to get people to riding more, and also maybe push leaders and people in power to see what they can do to encourage it more, whether it's changing infrastructure or increasing funding into areas where young people or people of every age can get on their bike. and experience all the benefits from it. I'm going to ask you in a second about sort of your highlights or the best outcomes, I guess, from the event. I think what you just said is definitely one of them. But before that, what were sort of maybe one or two of the biggest challenges you that came up during the event, and how did you deal with those? How did you deal with those challenges in the moment under the pressure?
Yeah, and I think there was a. I already mentioned about COVID, and you know everybody was challenged by COVID, but because we were forming the event and the company and recruiting staff and all of that was done through the point when we were actually locked down, it was incredibly difficult. You know, and I had a huge advantage of the first 7 or 8 people I recruited were all people that I knew. So I was working, you know, it wasn't new people that you had to get to know. So you already had that connection with them, and a lot of them were people that I've worked with on previous events. So you knew what they were capable of and what their strengths and weaknesses were. So that was helpful, but it was still really really difficult, and particularly in terms of advancing some of your planning when you've got to do everything by Teams calls rather than being in person. It genuinely is a lot harder. So that was definitely one challenge. I think another challenge, and again, you know, it always sounds like you're complaining. We're talking about multi-million-pound budgets, but the budget was set in 2017, 2018. And by the time we came to delivering the event, we'd been through COVID. You know, we then created an economic crisis. Then there was a war in Ukraine where we had fuel shortages. And for events, most events were finding that their budgets were shooting up by 25 to 30% because events are very dependent on fuel to basically move stuff and move people. And they're also dependent on temporary infrastructure. And again, those materials were just in short supply. As a building trade would tell you, you know, all materials were in short supply. So really, for us, we were stuck on a budget that had been put together in 2017, 2018, and trying to deliver where everybody else is 25, 30% up. And we were flatlined. And that was incredibly challenging. In the end, we got about a 5-6% increase in budget, which allowed us to get across the line. But it was very challenging, and it was probably a tenth of the budget for 2014 Commonwealth Games. So for the scale and the diversity of the event, it just shows you that actually it was a very good value for money event. I guess the other thing that was a huge challenge for us was really around there was a lot of, I suppose, chatter around protesters coming in and the issues that were going to be with protesters around the event, mostly around Just Stop Oil. And there's a few reasons for that. You know, they were targeting all major events regardless. Over the summer, you saw that at Wimbledon, you saw it at the Grand National, etc. So they'd already been targeting events, snooker. But actually, for us, there was probably a couple of added things. One is that the route was going to go pretty much past Grangemouth Refinery. It was certainly within, you could see it in the background as it went past. And then the other one is that British Cycling obviously have Shell as a shirt sponsor. They have a financial partnership with Shell. So both of those made us a bigger target, I think, for the Just Stop Oil protesters. And what that did is it created a huge amount of extra work in planning for how we ensured safety, first of all, but also tried to minimise any potential disruption to the event. And there was a lot of cost base in that, and a lot of time and effort in planning it. And it was a real challenge because you didn't actually know what was going to happen. You just had to prepare as best you could. And then I guess the final one, George, would be that the way the event was set up was that we were a public sector organisation. We were a sub-company of Visit Scotland. And that puts us in a situation where we had to do everything through public procurement. And just the time was short, things were difficult. A lot of the companies had gone bust in the market, and that was incredibly challenging, doing everything through public procurement. It sucked time out of the organisation that we really didn't have. And in the end, probably meant that we had to have more people on board than we had originally planned because we just needed the bodies to get things done.
Awesome. Could you just explain a wee bit on what the difference is with it being a lot of sort of a public company compared to a private one, and what that involves extra work wise?
Yeah, so I mean, most people from good practice would normally test the market. If you're trying to get some grandstands put up, you would test the market and maybe get 2 or 3 quotes for it. But effectively, if you're a private company, you just go and ask people for a quote. You give them a specification. You say what will it cost to get that done, and then you can pick whichever one you want. So you can pick the cheapest one. which you might well do, or you can go, well, actually, I think these guys are better quality. They seem a bit more reliable. Other people have said they're going to pick them. In public procurement, to protect public money, there's a set of processes you have to go through depending on the different levels of spend. And at that kind of level that you'd be talking, which might be, say, 100 grand for putting up grandstands, it's a pretty protracted process. It usually takes a couple of months. You have to go to a market, you have to score things in a certain way, and you have to take the offer which gives you best value. Now, all of those things become quite difficult because quite often people don't want to fill out the paperwork they need to for the public procurement. So a lot of people won't tender for public work because it's in small companies it's quite difficult and it takes a lot of time. And if you don't get the work, you do 5 of those and don't get any work. You've just worked for a month for nothing. Um,
Hmm.
there are definitely challenges in it. It totally works for the huge big infrastructure projects for local authorities when they're building buildings or they're building roads because that's what it was originally designed for. For events, it's really tricky. I mean, sometimes there is only one supplier in the market, um, and it's also there around for value in kind support. We have to procure value in kind support, so we have to put it out to the market to see if who wants to give us free water or free generators or free uniforms. That has to go out to a tender process as well. And again, a lot of the companies just refuse to fill out the paperwork, and therefore, on that basis, you don't get the value in kind that you might have got if you were able to be a little bit more fleet footed.
Very good, nice one. Thank you for sort of explaining that difference. And yeah, I mean, so many challenges out with your control that come up during the event, and that's, I guess, a whole part of event planning, especially something on this size with such a big lead up is working around those. I know the protesters thing. It was a very sort of prevalent thing last summer, as you said. But yeah, it was dealt with well, and I remember walking around Glasgow on the men's road race, and all the Dutch fans, the Netherlands fans, in their bright orange tops, being like, it's probably not the best choice of outfit on a day
Yeah,
like this. Um, but yeah, it was good. I guess coming to the last to wrap up with the UCIs. What was your personal highlight or best experience from a whole event? Maybe a moment that you were just able to sit there and just take it all in and be proud of everything you'd put together.
yeah. I mean, it's a really interesting one. I mean, I certainly have a couple that I would highlight, but I think overall for me, I spent almost all of the event in the bunker. So I was the silver command for the event, so I was in the bunker pretty much all the time. Really didn't see a lot of the actual action. I had a couple of days where I managed to sneak out for a bit and go and watch things, but we opened the bunker at about 7 o'clock in the morning, and we were usually there till 11 o'clock at night, and we ran a couple of shifts, but every day you were there for 8, 10, 12 hours, So it was quite demanding. But for me, probably the way that things went on the 6th of August, which was the men's road race, where we did have the protest. I started that morning. I got a phone call at 3:30 in the morning and went into the bunker because there were things happening that needed to be dealt with. They got dealt with. We got through the road race. It was the busiest overall day of competition, um, with a lot of things going on. And I think I got home at just after midnight. Got back to my flat. It was actually my birthday that day as well, and both my kids had bought me a bottle of whiskey, so I had to have one of each just to be even-handed. So, but that day, the fact that that's what events are about, it was adrenaline all day, just didn't stop from one thing to the next, and and you're in there obviously for a chunky sort of 20 odd hour shift, and it was just full on the whole time. So I think that was probably a highlight in that. That's the adrenaline that you run on in the events, and some of it was really good. There was great stuff happening. I actually was really pleased with the way the protest was dealt with. As you said, everything worked the way we anticipated it was going to work. The race continued. We got a great finish to the race, really exciting. And from a world cycling point of view, you got a podium that everybody would say the best riders were right up there, which means you've got a good course, right? Um, so yeah, I think that overall that would probably be a highlight. The other one for me was probably the guys from Rear Management, who it was their last ever time running the mountain bikes. They usually ran the World Cup, and this was their swan song, if you like. Great guys to work with over the years, Mike and Leslie from Rear. And at the end of the event, they were presented with broadswords, which were engraved with every winner of the World Cup since they started in 2002. And that was a pretty special moment. I've done a lot of work with them over the years, know them well, and I think it's good recognition for them of the amount of effort and work they've put in, and how they've created probably one of Scotland's best events.
Awesome. Yeah, that's brilliant to hear, and recognition for people that make such a big difference and things make things work as well as they do. That's awesome. Well, thank you for sort of that brief or maybe not so brief overview of the Cycling Worlds. An amazing event, and hopefully it will come back to Scotland one day, especially for, in my view, I'd love to see it again. Up Stirling Castle for the time trial would be brilliant. Moving on to a bit more of your past experience. As you said earlier, you've been involved in many of the Commonwealth and Olympic Games preparation and working in New Zealand as well. So could you explain a bit more about the work you did for Commonwealth Games and the Olympic Games, and the support you gave for athletes and teams heading out?
Yeah, so I suppose, George, that goes back to when I started at Sport Scotland. So back in the late 90s, one of the first things I was given was to work with Commonwealth Games Scotland. And at that time, it was planning towards the Kuala Lumpur Games in 1998. And we didn't have any athlete lottery funding or anything at that point. It didn't exist. It was actually just about to start. I think it started in 1998. But what we did was I put together a schedule where local authorities would give anyone who was in the frame to be selected for the Commonwealth teams free access to the training facilities. So swimming pools, gyms, athletics tracks, if they had them, whatever, they would give them access to that. And we created an access card. And then we ran a whole series of team camps about, talking to people about, because they're going out to KL, there was various things about what you need to be aware of, the acclimatization, some of the science, and put all that program together. So that was kind of my starting point. And really from there, it was I had an opportunity in 1999 to go to the British Olympic Association preparation camp, which was a year out from the Sydney Olympics. They were testing where they were going to do the holding camp. They were giving people a chance to see the training facilities, to work on them, to look at how they were going to do the logistics, and people, just to make people familiar with it. So it was one thing they would be more certain about. And I got to be out there for 2 weeks to theoretically to observe. But actually, what ended up happening was a couple of members of staff from the British Olympic Association got really ill, and the other one had to fly home because of a family emergency. So we ended up just stepping in and doing things. And fortunately, because I could drive a motorboat, I ended up got my powerboat license. I ended up working with a rowing team and driving the boat for them. So actually, that was great for me. I had a brilliant experience working with Steve Redgrave and Matthew Pinson and Catherine Granger and all of the rowers who were in the 2000 Olympic team, and basically driving a boat up there. It was a coach's boat, so the people that were shouting at the rowers to go faster, I was driving the boat for them. So that was quite good, and I got invited. On the basis of that, got invited back the following year to work at the team camp. Was out there for 2.5 months. My official title, I think, was the Minister of Fun. I was in charge of all of the non-sport activity, so everything recreational to keep the athletes entertained when they're on the holding camp. And it was really about acclimatization for the athletes. They would, because they're traveling around the world. The science tells you that you need a couple of weeks to acclimatize fully to be able to perform absolutely at best. And really, that's what we were doing: is we were providing an environment for them to train and acclimatize and get themselves absolutely ready to drop down into Sydney and perform at their best. So that was the start of the journey. And I did the same role for Commonwealth Games Scotland at the 2006 Games. And I planned it all, but didn't quite get to execute it for the 2018 Games as well.
Amazing, nice. How do you? Obviously, you have that chance in Sydney as well to prepare the year before. But how do you go about sort of learning about what you can pick up and what you can support for the athletes? So, is it chatting with local people? Is it a lot of research? Is it sort of previous experience? How do you find things or find ways to prepare best to be able to give this support to the athletes?
Yeah, I think it's probably you start with the athletes. What do they want? So you're usually talking to the coaches and the team managers and saying, right, what do you need for training? And that can vary from some are pretty non-specific. So like the rugby sevens guys was like, as long as we've got a pitch, it doesn't need to be fantastic. As long as there's a pitch there, that we can get access to. We can get access to a gym and preferably access to a pool. that's great. Again, the pool doesn't have to be huge. It's really just for a bit of recovery training and whatever. That's what we need. It's pretty open, and you can get very much community facilities for them to work out of. Whereas, say, hockey, for example, they really need to train on the same surface they're going to be playing on, or the training is less relevant. It becomes much more difficult for them if you can't get the right surface. If it's weightlifting, for example, they need the right bars, and it needs to be the bars that they're going to lift with. Otherwise, it's a different feel, it's a different weighting, etc. So some are very, very specific about what they want, and some are a bit less specific. And then it's a case of going and trying to find exactly what they want, providing those facilities. If you can't get exactly what they want, where are they prepared to compromise? Is something good enough? And remembering that this is for, relatively light training into Commonwealth Games. This isn't the ongoing high performance environment. Sometimes near enough is good enough. At a prep camp, it's more about acclimatization into being in the country than it is about hard training. But equally, it's about fine tuning, right? So you don't want it to be a complete community sport environment. So that's kind of how you start out. Speak to the coaches, team managers, see what they want, see what's available, and see if you can mix those two together. Most of the time, we were able to do that. We were able to get something that was good enough, and sometimes we would set up a temporary weights facility, or whatever. We'd actually bring the stuff in, put a tent up, and put the weights in. Sometimes you can find a gym that works for people. I think there were a couple of occasions where sports were like, "That's not right for us. We need to go elsewhere." So, certainly on the Sydney Olympics Gold Coast experience, the track cyclists went to Brisbane because there wasn't a velodrome on the Gold Coast, so they were based in Brisbane rather than up on the Gold Coast. And when we were in 2006, the swimmers had a different pool they wanted to go to, because there wasn't a 50-metre pool where we were in Bendigo, and they wanted to. So I think they had 2 days up in Bendigo at the beginning, and then they went off to actually train elsewhere in a 50-metre pool. And again, that's fine if that's the performance imperative. They're responsible for their results. They've got to do that. All we can do is use what's there. The idea of the team camp is that you can provide a lot of those background services very easily. So particularly the sports science and sports medicine, really important to have the doctors and the physios there, because again, you're always dealing with a few little niggly injuries, or things that can be managed into games. And the prep camp environment gives you the chance to do that. And also, if you get the odd person who really hasn't acclimatized well and is getting ill, you've got a chance to nurture them through that in the time that you've got, so they don't miss out on performing, really just by the virtue of the fact that it's the other side of the world. And you have to aggregate that for it to work. Some of the sports, the bigger sports, have got the money and the resource to be able to go and do it themselves, and some did.
Excellent, yeah. And I guess the physical preparation is such a key part, but were you involved much in, say, maybe a bit of mental preparation as well, whether it's just helping athletes relax, giving them that space to be able to relax, or maybe if they're struggling being away from home, that extra support, whether it's working with a sports psychologist or something like that? Was there scope to be able to support athletes mentally as well?
Yeah, look, I think, there's some very specific things there in terms of the camps did have sports psychologists at them as well, so there is somebody there. But certainly for me in the Melbourne experience as a director of the camp, I tried to set an environment that was relaxed, so people can, and we gave them vehicles to drive. So each sport had their own vehicles, so they could come and go as they want. They don't have to hit the schedules. They can just jump in their van and drive away and go to training when they want to go to training. We had leisure facilities around. We had communal dining, and of course we're in Australia. It was lovely weather, so you had outdoor furniture outside all of the cabins that people could sit in, and we put entertainments on at night. Some people opted in, some didn't, but we had various bands and bingo and all sorts of things that we did just to give people a bit of fun and a bit of distraction. And also we then managed any media that came in, we managed. So we'd ask people if they did want to do interviews or didn't want to do interviews, and if they did, we would sit in with them and manage that to make sure it was positive and useful. But overall, it was about creating the right environment. The whole emphasis was about preparing people to compete at the Commonwealth Games, and I suppose negating the fact that they've now just moved right halfway around the world and into a completely alien environment, both in terms of temperature, um, and that acclimatization piece. Quite often the food, and again, we set all the menus, um, determined what was going to be put in front of them as food as well. So that sort of stuff's quite important.
Awesome. Yeah, trying to create that home away from home, I guess, and
Yeah,
make it
absolutely.
an easy transition. Nice one. Moving on, I guess now to your time in New Zealand and your chance to work over there. So I believe you were working on events while you're over in New Zealand. How did that opportunity arise, and what were some of the things you were involved in?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess it's one of those things. I mean, go back to the Sport Accord conference. You know, because I was at the Sport Accord conference every year for Event Scotland, you get known. Not least because we did a whiskey tasting every year, so everybody comes to a stand for that. But so you get known. I was asked to apply for the job as the head of major events in Auckland. It was, you know, I was tapped up to apply for it, along with, I'm sure, some other people as well. I applied for it, got offered the job, decided to take it, and obviously it's quite a big thing. But you know, for me at that point, my kids were both in their early 20s, so they were old enough to stand on their own feet over here, or come with us if they wanted to come with us. You know, it's a decision that they could make, and so we thought, right, well, we'll go over there. And probably the big thing that swung it for me was, yes, yeah, Auckland felt like it was a really good place to go. I've always liked New Zealand. I've been to New Zealand before. I really like the country. I like the culture, and I like the people. But the idea that was that Auckland as a city, it's very similar to Glasgow in terms of the demographics. You know, same sort of size as Glasgow, same sort of suburban area around it, if you like. Um, but it's quite different in terms of obviously the population makeup. But then I guess the other part of it is that over the last few years into that 2018 moment when I went over there, it hadn't been doing particularly well in events. That they'd kind of fallen off things a little bit. Their event strategy was needing redone, and I thought, well, this it's a real opportunity to go in there, rewrite the event strategy, and do some things. But also, the New Zealand team had just won the America's Cup, so 2021 they were going to host the America's Cup, which meant that you knew that that's something you're going to be working on, and you know when you're up there in terms of the really big top events in the world, America's Cup is definitely one of them. You know, I mean, there's not many events that last 3 months, so you know you look at it and go, well, that's something I would really like to be involved in. So going over there, it was really, in terms of what I was involved in, it was every event that happened in Auckland that was supported by either the council or the Auckland, what they're now called as Auckland Unlimited. It was, I think, the snappy title when I was there was Auckland Tourism Events and Economic Development, but Auckland Unlimited sounds a bit better. Um, so yeah, I was involved in loads of events, cultural events, sports events, venue-based events, non-venue based, with probably the America's Cup being the jewel in the crown.
Nice one. Yeah, good stuff. And as you said, you'd been to New Zealand before and liked it. And that was a big reason for you moving over there. But traveling and visiting is a lot different to moving your complete life over there. So was it an easy transition? Were you able to fit into the role really quickly, sort of implement your skills and your ideas, or did it take a bit of time to learn a bit more about the place and what they were wanting?
Yeah, look, I think that there's probably a number of answers to that. You know, it's actually quite a big question. I think that we, both myself and my wife, settled in really easily because, you know, the people in New Zealand are just great. And you know, my experience is that you just meet lots of nice people, and they kind of say what they mean. So if they say you can come and stay with us, they mean you can come and stay with us, right? And you can actually stay as long as you want. If they mean come round for drinks, they actually mean come round for drinks. You know, people don't say things that they don't mean there, which you know sometimes you do get here. I mean, a couple of my friends that I was back in New Zealand at the beginning of this year for 6 weeks, and a couple of friends that I had there. One of them said to us, "Oh, come and stay with us as long as you want. Oh, and by the way, I've got a car you can use while you're here," and they literally just give you their stuff to use. It's great. And likewise, we would do that for them if they come over here. But I think the bit that was made it quite easy to settle in is that a lot of New Zealand's policies around, particularly around events like health and safety legislation, everything has followed the UK. So a lot of those things are very similar. You know, the rules and regulations are quite similar, if not exactly the same. You get a lot of people who work internationally. So, there's people I was working with in New Zealand that worked on things like the London 2012 Olympics and Glasgow 2014 Commonwealth Games. So you do get people who've got experience of working up this end of the world as well. And then I think the other part of it is that probably for me, having worked for Event Scotland for 10 years, events were all over the place. You could be at the Cowell Highland Gathering one week and Mountain Bike World Cup the next, and then the Modern Inverness the next week. You could be all over the place. And it was a lot of weekends, probably 30 weekends a year away from home. Whereas in Auckland, all my events were in Auckland because that was a job. So actually, even when you're at an event all weekend, you can still get home to your bed at night. So it was actually quite, for me, it was quite a different environment. That was quite an interesting kind of learning for me. And I had a really big team that were that were looking for a leader. So actually, they were. If you're a people person, you talk to them, find out what they want, find out what what their thoughts and I suppose attitudes to things were, and they basically felt that they hadn't been particularly well led for the last couple of years. So they knew what to do, but they didn't know how it all fitted together. So everybody was doing their bit, but it was gradually moving further and further apart. So really, my job was just to bring it all back together again, write a strategy, get the team working as a team. So I didn't actually find that difficult. I loved the job, loved the people. I'm still friends with most of those people. In touch with a lot of them, saw a lot of them when I was over in New Zealand. And in fact, the Glasgow event strategy work I'm doing just now, I'm working with two of my ex-colleagues from New Zealand on it. They're helping me out working with it.
Awesome. Good stuff. Yeah. So I guess an overall really positive experience. Just for the last question I've got around it, you said how a lot of the legal stuff, I guess, with health and safety is very similar with a lot similar to the UK as well. But were there any cultural differences, whether it's the approach to events, sort of finishing times, starting times, having people involved? Were there any significant cultural differences you found in this role that you maybe learnt on the job or you'd not taken into account before?
Yeah, look, I think the biggest one, and anyone that's been to New Zealand probably knows this, is that the Maori culture is quite a different thing to any other kind of any other country that I've ever been in that the Maori actually have the traditional rights across a whole load of parts of the city. So there are different tribes, or iwi as they're called, that that you have to ask permission for to hold an event. And the permission is pretty much always granted unless you're trying to do something that's flagrantly like disrespectful. But but you still have to ask for the permission because the land belongs to them. And there was a group called the Kaitiaki Forum, which was basically all the different iwi from around Auckland that you would sit and talk to about the events you're bringing in and how you demonstrate Maori culture within those events. So for pretty much every event we did, we would have a Maori welcome at the beginning, which is a great cultural thing to do, but actually was part of kind of what you needed to do. So it wasn't that you were choosing to do it every time. You would just do it. And then also we really tried to bring Te Reo language in a lot more, and I guess you see that in Scotland with Gaelic being brought more back to it. But really trying to push Te Reo language, which had been squashed down by the English language over a period of time. So certainly in my time there, we went from Auckland just being called Auckland on the brand to it being Auckland and Tamaki Makuro, which is the Te Reo for Auckland. And now it's becoming more and more prevalent across everything that happens. Signages in both languages, the brand is changing, and I would think in the next 5 to 10 years, Auckland won't be called Auckland anymore, because it was really named after the Duke of Auckland from England, who was part of a force that went over there and subjugated the Maori tribes in that area. So it's probably not really a great name for the city. So actually taking it back to being Tamaki Makuro is probably the right way to go. But obviously it's, as you probably know, when cities change their names, it always takes a bit of time because people have to recognise that is actually the same place. So yeah, that whole Maori culture
Yeah.
thing, I found it fascinating, really interesting, and I had a lot of friends over there and people who were staff in my team that were Maori, and they're really welcoming, and it's not a hostile culture at all. They're very much about explaining the culture to you so that you have an understanding of where they're coming from. But it's cool because it's a real connection to the land and to your ancestors and where you've come from, both in physical terms and in lineage terms, which I think is actually probably something that we could learn a lot from.
Amazing. That's so fascinating to hear, and it's. I think it's really good the power that events have in expressing the culture and opening it up as well. And if it's gonna lead to change and more recognition for the different heritage and historical culture there, I think that's only a good thing. So, yeah, that's really cool to hear. I was a bit surprised by how strong that is. Just a really good book that I like, very sort of psychology, cultural based, is Belonging by um, what's his name? It's up here. Owen Eastwood. That's it. And he's
Yeah.
got sort of Maori heritage and talks really well about it. And it's fascinating, as you say, something we can all take from about our history and our culture and meaning and everything like that. Um, Coming on to, I guess, the last sort of section that I'd like to ask you about, Stuart, is working in events. My limited experience in them, they can be incredibly stressful and slightly draining as well when everything's going on. And as you said before, it's a bit about living on the adrenaline. So, do you have techniques or ways that or things you do when you're working on events or in the build up to sort of make sure you stay level headed, prevent that burnout, and stay calm during the events, or does it just come with experience that you don't get stressed out anymore? How do you approach events?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there are definitely a few techniques and things that you can do, but I suppose at the start of it, I would say like after every big major event that you work on, you always get a bit of post-event blues because you spend a lot of time. I mean, it might be that you spend 3 months planning it, it might be 3 years, but you spend a long period of time going towards a point, which is the event. And again, it might be a 1 day event, it might be a week long event, it might be a 2 week long event, but you spend all this time moving to that. And then when you're in it, it's brilliant. It's really high fueled adrenaline. You just do what needs to be done. You have to make dynamic decisions. It's really easy to do it because basically stuff needs to be decided in the next 5 minutes, or the opportunity's gone. So actually being in an event, everybody that's the adrenaline kick that people love. And then as soon as it's finished, there's a bit of a kind of like, people talk about post event blues. You really get into that kind of like, oh, it's over now, and what's next now. I think being aware that that's what happens and that's how you might feel is it's like I suppose how you're going to feel if a relationship breaks up. You're going to feel sad and unhappy. That it's the same here. If you know it's going to happen, you can manage it a little bit better. You can. So what I always do is I always book a couple of trips away after the event. Give myself a little bit of time for packing up and whatever, but have a weekend away here or a week away there that's already booked in, so I've got something to look forward to. Also, in that lead-in piece to it, one of the things is look after yourself. So I mean, I we talked about cycling quite a bit, but I cycle a lot. That's my kind of form of exercise, whether it's on the mountain bike, the gravel bike, the road bike. So just get out on the bike, and if you think you haven't got time for it, make time for it. The half an hour or an hour that you spend out on your bike, you'll become at least that half hour or hour more productive for having been out. So you'll get the work done quicker. It's not like anybody can not leave their desk for that length of time. So for some people, it might be going for a swim, it might just be going for a walk with a dog, whatever. But just make sure you're doing those things where you get away from a desk and get away from it and do something you want to do. Um, I don't necessarily advocate it for everybody, but I've got a big whiskey collection. I like my whiskey, so every so often I'll have a couple of whiskies at night. And again, just not going over the score, but in that lead up into the event, just give yourself something to look forward to. I'm going to have a couple of drams tonight. That'll be something to look forward to, something that you enjoy doing, so that you're managing positivity in your brain. And then probably my biggest one is just remembering that most of the time in our events, most of the stuff that we're doing, it's not a matter of life and death. Most of the things that we deal with, it's about people having fun. It's about people doing something they enjoy doing. It's about international competitors getting together, or it's about international culture and arts or whatever. It's not usually life and death, and as long as we plan the health and safety stuff right, that's where we stay. There are other people who have really stressful jobs where they deal with people who are on death's doorstep every day. People in the NHS and whatever who've got what I would call really stressful jobs. We're under time pressured jobs, but actually sometimes you just have to take a little bit of step back and goes, if it goes wrong, as long as people don't die, that's number one. And then, let's try and make sure it's safe first, fun second. And that's really where we've got to go. Is 90% of what we do is really about trying to make sure people have fun. The safety bit's really important, but most days it's not life and death.
Excellent, good stuff. Yeah, and I think on that bit you were talking about before about that balance, and when I guess events can become very overwhelming because it's just constant decisions, constant things coming up, having that time to keeping that balance of time where you've got time for yourself and you can just switch off and, as you say, go on your bike or have something to look forward to in the evening. I think it's really important and keeps you being able to keep going during those difficult times. I know you said, I remember when we spoke a few years ago about how you changed your structure as well. Are you still working with your 4-day work week, a couple really long days, Monday, Tuesday, and then more time at the weekend, or how's that looking at the moment?
It varies up and down, George. So, like, certainly the 4 months into the UCI Championship, so sort of April, May, June, July, there wasn't a single day I didn't work. Weekends included, like right through, you're working. Now, some of those days it was only a couple of hours first thing in the morning, but I had to work pretty much every day to get it to work. And some of those are very, very long days. And it wasn't just me. That was pretty common across the staff. Everyone was pushing pretty hard to get us to where we needed to be. I guess now for me, because I'm back doing consultancy work, is I've got a lot more flex in it. And actually, my wife's got a job over the weekend, so we'd actually I'm tending to take more like Monday and Tuesday will be the days that I don't do too much work. I'll still take calls if I need to take calls, but I don't program to sit down at my desk on Mondays and Tuesdays. I do it over the weekend, and then we maybe go away in our van or go away for a weekend, or even just have a couple of days where we get out on the bikes or whatever on the Monday, Tuesday. And actually, that works out quite well because it's quieter. It's like not so many people around.
Yeah.
But I think it's about flexibility and it's about doing what suits you at the time. So certainly for me, that the bit I talked about before with a 4-day schedule, it was great. Where everything else is equal. You go right. I work big long days Monday, Tuesday, a bit less on Wednesday, Thursday, and then you get Friday off for a long weekend. It's a great way to work, and if you're in control of your own destiny and it's all your own consultancy work, there's no reason why you shouldn't do that. So I'm sure I'll get back to that once my wife's not working the weekends anymore. I'm sure I'll get back to the trying to cram 40, 50 hours into 4 days rather than doing it over 5. And to me it just makes sense that you have that time. But equally, I get up pretty early and take the dog out for a walk first thing every morning because I enjoy doing that. The dog's walked and she's happy, but it sets you up for the day. And I think it's one of those things that you can fall into the trap if you're working at home a lot, that you just get up and go straight to the desk. And I think the thing about a commute is you have to think about things when you're commuting. You're either on your bike, you're in a car, you're on the train, and even if it's only a 20-minute journey, you've got 20 minutes to kind of move from the home zone to the work zone. If you've just got to walk down the corridor and into another room, I find that quite difficult. So the dog walk is really effectively instead of a commute.
Yeah, good stuff. Nice one. Well, thank you for all your insight on firstly the UCIs, your time in New Zealand, the Commonwealth and Olympic Games, and then I really enjoyed this last week section talking more about sort of how you stay mentally on top of things when working and how things work for you. Last question, just to finish on. It might be a bit of a difficult one for you, but what has been your favorite event that you've been part of? Whether it's solely as an attendee or something you've worked on. What's been your favorite event if you can pick one?
Yeah, look, I mean, it is almost an impossible question to answer, but probably the event that just put a smile on my face and made me smile for about 3 days was an event in New Zealand called Splore. And it's a festival, music festival with lots of other bits and pieces going on, arts and crafts and lots of food stalls and everything. And it takes place on a beach or the back of a beach, just round the coast from Auckland. And it sets out its stall of being a really environmental festival because basically they recycle 100% of the stuff on site. There's no trace that they've been there once they finish the festival, and it's very kind of old style hippie. You know, lots of people in swimwear having dancing and having fun, and there is a bit of alcohol, but it's not like a big piss up festival. It's just people having a really good vibe in the sunshine. Lots of different kinds of music. So we were supporting the festival, decided to go to it. So one of my friends and his wife and myself and my wife, we kayaked there in 2 double kayaks from just round in Auckland. So a decent sort of 10-mile kayak in to the festival, landed on the beach, locked our kayaks up against a tree and just went and partied for a few hours, had a great time, enjoyed the festival. And then a few hours later, we kayaked back to Auckland, and I just couldn't stop smiling just because it's just a cool thing to do. And, you know, you had all sorts of people giving us high fives because we've kayaked into the festival. Lots of people on boats going to the festival. Lots of people would sail in and then take their tenders in, or even just dive off their boat and swim in, which is a type of thing that Kiwis do. You know, it's like, well, why wouldn't you? You know, it's an environmental festival. So if you can get there by bike or kayak, then that's what you should do. So yeah, that was certainly one that left me with a huge smile on my face and just feeling really good about life.
Love that. Awesome. That just makes me want to move to New Zealand right now. That's good to hear. Well, look, Stuart, thank you for all your time today. I've had an excellent time hearing about everything you're involved in and learning a lot as well. So, yeah, thank you for joining me.
No worries. Thanks very much, George. Good to speak to you again.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Get Psyched Show. Be sure to leave a review on Spotify, where you will also find some of our previous episodes with sports psychologists, journalists, and pro athletes. Thank you.